Hello and welcome to On Point. I'm Sharonna Allahyar. Today we're going to be talking about teenagers in trouble and what one group here in the San Fernando Valley is doing to help. Just a few miles east of our beautiful CSUN campus is a gang-infested area crammed with rent-controlled apartments and public housing. Law enforcement officials sometimes call it the witch's hat for its cursed history and a curved street which, when viewed on a map, is pointed at the top. This neighborhood is responsible for more than 10% of gang-related crime in the entire valley. What happens to children who grow up in areas like this? Joining me today to discuss the issue are Executive Director of Cloud and Fire Ministries, Melody Rossi, postdoctoral clinical psychologist Elizabeth Powell, and 18-year-old former gang member Jose Ruiz. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
So, tell us about the Witch's Hat neighborhood. What are the socioeconomic factors that create it?
We're in North Hills, and in that community, 75% of the residents have a household income of less than $20,000. And as you know, it's really expensive to live in Los Angeles. And there's other factors that really affect youth there, like a very high dropout rate. About 76% of all students drop out of high school. And most of the people who live in that community are fairly new immigrants, so a lot of times their families have a lot of struggles that they're dealing with.
Okay. And what happens to kids that grow up in a neighborhood like this?
Well, there's not necessarily a lot of options for the kids, and so sometimes they drop out of school. Melody mentioned the 76% dropout, partially to work and be able to support their family, to try to get income. So a lot of them just stop going to school so they can do that. Sometimes they get involved in gangs or something else that may pull them away from their family. So there's not necessarily a lot of resources for them living in that area.
Okay, and can you describe the behaviors of an at-risk teen?
Sure. There's a lot of different things that could fall into that category of at-risk. When you're looking at North Hills in our particular area, it probably has a lot more to do with drugs and alcohol, with crime involvement, with just not being in school, being out on the streets late at night. Do you have any other things that you think of?
No.
Mostly?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. One of the things that comes to my mind is a lot of the families, for whatever reason, whether it's a cultural value or, again, maybe a coping skill, a lot of the families have a tendency towards violence in terms of how children are disciplined or how people in the family interact, and sometimes that leads to young people getting involved with violence because they think it's normal.
Okay, and who introduced you to the gang life?
Well, kind of like people around my neighborhood, since they do it, I guess I tend to do it too. Like friends, cousins, sometimes family members that would talk about being a gang is cool, you know, stuff like that. Like, feels like protection, feels like they want to be part of a family. Maybe because of that, people go into gangs and stuff.
So what was one thing that intrigued you to want to participate in that?
Well, I was not that close to my parents. They kind of worked a lot. So I'm the oldest kid. So then, I went to look for family members, replacements, and I guess I found it in them. I found family where I could hang out and, participate in stuff.
So how was life growing up?
Well, I grew up in Mexico, and over there it was pretty hard because it's more suffering than here, but it's still pretty gang affiliated over there. And then when I came here, it's different. You get more resources to being in gangs. It's easier to get a gun here. It's easier to get drugs here. It's easier, in California.
So why did you participate in these behaviors? Did you ever think it was something wrong to do?
I didn't see it as wrong. I saw it as a regular lifestyle, like people choose to. To me, it was like a career. You become a gangster. It's like that's how you make your money. That's how you make your friends. That's how you find your girls and stuff like that.
When you talk about at-risk or risky behavior, I don't think most of the people that go into gangs see it that way. They more see it as survival. So it's something that you're doing to take care of yourself. Who's going to protect you if you don't go into a gang? Who's going to make sure you get your needs met if you don't go into a gang? So we can look at it from the outside and say, this is really risky. Why are you getting a gun? Why are you wanting to be involved in drugs? But most of the students who I work with are saying that was my only option. It felt like it was protection. It's how I needed to survive. So I don't think it's seen as risk from their perspective.
And as a parent, what are some red flags to look for if it were to ever come up, or what are some signs to look for to see if your kids are at risk?
You know, it's interesting because I feel like more than anything, the parents not being there is probably one of the biggest risk factors. So parents aren't necessarily seeing it because they're not there, and not always because they don't want to be there, but sometimes because they're working and they're trying to make enough money to provide for their family. But staying out late, right, coming home just late at night, hanging out with large groups of people, those are kind of the signs. I don't know if there's a lot of other good signs that you can...
Well, one of the things that a gang researcher here in Los Angeles has found that I think is a really shocking statistic is that in communities where there's a prevalence towards gangs, there was research as to why some young people went into a gang and others didn't. And so he wanted to drill down and see what was the single largest indicator of whether someone would be able to stay out of a gang or not. And surprisingly, that factor is whether they had dinner with their family. And this isn't a religious researcher, this is a gang researcher. So if you're asking the question, what are some signs? I think a big sign is if there's family cohesiveness, if the parents are involved with the young people. A lot of times, young people are so desperate for someone to see what's going on with them, and if nobody at home has time or interest in that, they'll look somewhere else for that.
And how do at-risk teens find out about a program like Cloud and Fire Ministries to seek help?
Well, we might want to ask Jose how.
Well, I was kind of doing bad in my school. I got kicked out of Taft High School and I went to Canoga. From there, my counselor kind of saw I was struggling and she recommended me to Cloud and Fire.
And other students hear about us word of mouth. There's parents in the community. We get a lot of foot traffic. We're housed in a church, and so the church puts the word out, and the mothers in the church put the word out. I'd say our single biggest factor is word of mouth, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and school counselors often refer, I think.
And how long is the program for participants?
It really depends on what credits they come in with as far as where they are in school. So most of them sign up for a year and then see how long it finished. But this is Jose's second year at the program.
And we have other programs. He's in a program called Youth Build, and in that program, we actually have young people ages 17 to 24 finish high school with us, and they also learn construction at the same time. But we have other programs, after-school programs for youth from 7 years old up to 18, so that while they're in their school years, they have a safe place to go after school to prevent them from getting involved in risky behaviors. And those youth, usually when they come to us, whatever age they come, they just stay with us all the way through high school and oftentimes now through college.
And what are some extracurricular activities that they participate in outside of school if they're not at Cloud and Fire?
If they're not at Cloud and Fire, there's not a lot available to them. I think now in our community, we might even have a sports league, but for many years, I've been in this community for 15 years, we didn't have any sports options. There was really nothing for them to do. So there's just not a lot available in the Witch's Hat.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and research shows that at-risk youth struggle with complex issues and scenarios that are brought on by peers, mentors, family members, and difficult social environments. Who do you think is to blame?
To blame? Well, I think that we just have a society that's more and more fragmented. So I don't know if we can blame any group or any single factor, but I think that in the world we live in, most parents are working, whether it's a single family, a single parent home or a two-parent home. Our society is just, it's full of all kinds of obligations and pressures. And so I think it's just our society in general is causing people to live under the strain of survival, especially here in LA where it's so expensive. And there's just a lot of outside factors. So I don't know if there's a who as much as a what.
What do you think, Jose?
I really don't think who to blame. I guess you could just point fingers at anybody, but you know, it all comes down to a personal choice where you take to do the good or bad. That's, you know.
And did you have?
Well, I think we're asking kids to grow up really quickly and to watch younger siblings or to do a lot of work at the house or to make money for the family. And that's really challenging when they're not quite capable of doing that yet. And you know, if you look at just research on the brain and all of that kind of stuff, at 25 is when it's fully formed and you're actually able to do all that abstract reasoning, all that thinking. And here we are asking 14-year-olds to go make some money to take care of the younger kids, to get themselves to school. And they're not ready for that yet. And so they're faced with a lot of issues. The environment definitely plays a factor, the family plays a factor, but then you have just developmental factors too.
And what was a day like for you before you found Cloud and Fire?
Let's see. When I went to Taft, it was mostly gang affiliated stuff. Like I would go hang out with my friends, and we'd go tagging, whatever seemed fun. You know, there'd be some guy that we don't know after school, and we'll tell him, "Hey, what are you doing here?" Or we'd get on the bus and just ride anywhere, tag up the bus and drink, probably alcohol. They would drink, I wouldn't drink, but I want to burn myself out.
Okay.
And then when I went to Canoga, it was more different. It was more of a party situation for me. A lot of alcohol, a lot of drugs, different types of drugs, experimenting. Yeah.
Okay. And what is the day like now?
Now, I like going to church with my teachers. I like they kind of try to get me out more different activities like soccer and sports. Mostly. I'm also helping my community with the training that I receive from them. I try to go help other people with my skills, look for jobs that I could do.
Do you want to tell a little bit about the construction that you're doing and the way that you're helping?
Oh, we help Hope Gardens. It's a community over there by Foothill and Paxton. They help women that been on Skid Row to get back on their feet. They support them for like 2 years, from 6 months to 2 years. And we were helping them remodel some rooms so they could stay more capacity in the rooms for them.
Okay, and with Cloud and Fire being a faith Christian-based program, what role does religion play?
Well, we think that the really lasting transformation in anyone's life comes from within, not from outside influences. And so in our community, there is a real respect for God, and that's an integral part of the community. And so we explore with youth, if that's something that they're interested in, what does that mean? What is spirituality? What is faith? And all of our staff members are Christian, and we do present the issues that we've struggled with and how our faith has helped us through those things. And so I think a lot of the students find that is, by the end of their time with us, something that has opened up in their lives, and that's something they talk about. It's giving them strength and hope.
So if someone from another religion is seeking help from your program, would that be a problem?
Absolutely not. We're open to everybody coming, but everyone knows what our identity is, and we share that freely. But I think everybody feels comfortable. We have a student with us now who's an atheist, and we've entered into some really interesting discussions with him, and we always respect where everybody's coming from.
Okay, and did you have any religious training growing up?
My parents were Catholic, and they had some Jehovah's Witness thing, but it really wasn't my main thing. Just no really religious background.
And how do you feel about faith-based therapy?
Yeah, well, my role is counseling, and so when somebody comes in, one of my first questions is just to assess where they're at. I'm upfront about the fact, hey, it's Cloud and Fire, we have a religious background, so how do you feel about that? Mm-hmm. And just get a sense of where they're at. And then it's really up to them how much they want to talk about it or not talk about it. So there are some students that faith is not something that comes up very much in counseling, and there are other students that's something we talk about on a regular basis. So really for any therapy, I think that's important, is to assess where somebody's at with their spiritual life, and then to let them talk about that or not. You know, they're coming in with these questions of what's my meaning or what's my purpose in life, and that's often addressed by spiritual concerns. So I think it's really important to therapy, but also to let the client lead that. So that's what I do at Caught in Fire too.
Okay, so can therapy work without faith or religion?
Well, it can. I think there's always skills and things that you can get from therapy. So you can learn certain social skills, you could learn academic skills, you could deal with some anxiety and depression. But you know, from my own personal perspective, I think the long-lasting change comes from spirituality, comes from a relationship with God, as kind of Melody was talking about. The students in our program that I've seen do the best are the ones that end up having a relationship with God that's very deep and meaningful. But you know, you can get something from therapy, absolutely.
And if you grew up with God, do you think you would have kept yourself on a straight and narrow path in life?
I think I probably would have, just because it would have been putting me boundaries, you know, not so much freedom, if I would have known.
And what did your parents think about everything that was going on? Did they have an idea? Did they not?
They kind of did the, okay, we go to church like once every 2 month thing, or, you know, for like 2 months they would go straight and then we'd stop and then it turned.
And how'd they feel about your behavior and what you were doing growing up?
Growing up, well, they kind of really didn't put attention to me, mostly my sisters, because I was the guy. And I kind of had like that for myself, and, you know, I tried to get close to God at one point, but, you know, it wasn't like the time for me yet.
As far as the activities that you were participating in, you said that you did some drug dealing and gang activities. So did they have any idea what was going on?
No, actually, my dad doesn't really ask questions. I could come home with smelling like marijuana. He probably wouldn't say nothing. He probably said, "What are you doing? Why did you smell like that?" And I could like lie to him, and he'll believe it. And he works at nighttime. He works at daytime. So at nighttime I'm by myself, so I could sleep and I leave. I don't really see him during the week.
So did you have a lot of cash flow coming in?
Yeah.
Was that odd for them?
Yeah, he would ask me where to get things. I'd be like, oh, I worked for like a couple of days, or like I make up an excuse. Oh, my friend gave it to me, or yeah, that's pretty much what I'd use as an excuse.
All right. And what are some ways that parents or caregivers can do to prevent their teens from participating in activities like this if they live in a neighborhood like the Witches had?
I think most of it comes down to being there. So asking the questions, kind of like Jose's was just coming home and nobody knew. So asking the questions of what are you doing? What's going on? Let's have dinner together. Let's do something together. Getting them involved in activities, getting them involved in something that they're passionate about, that they like to do. That's really the best way to help somebody, is just to be involved. You know, teenagers say they don't want boundaries, but they really actually do. They need that structure. They need some limits, and not somebody who's necessarily, you know, giving them all the rules all the time. They have to have some decision-making power, but there's still limits that need to be set, and they want that.
One of the things that I've seen a lot, especially when there's a single mother at home, she may not feel, like Liz was saying, that she can set a boundary or that she can really control any behavior of her, especially a son. And so I think there might be some work to be done in just ways that empower the parents to feel like we can guide our children and we have the right to speak into their lives. Sometimes we see once a young person reaches maybe 15 or 16, the parents just back away and say, well, I can't help it, or I can't say anything, as if, you know, they can only be passive. And I think that is a real loss, because as Liz was saying, and I'm sure Jose would attest, that sometimes those boundaries create a safety net for them.
Mm-hmm. And what's the difference between teens in the past and now? Do you think there are more at-risk individuals today than before? Well,
there's more people today than there were before. I think that the spectrum, the amount of risk that young people take is so much more severe than it used to be. You know, a risky behavior in my day was going into the back lot of the high school and smoking cigarettes. And today, young people are engaging in all kinds of things, you know, still in elementary school. And in a community like ours, drugs are available anywhere. Children are recruited into gangs when they're 8 years old.
What kind of activities are you talking about? I want to hear more about that.
Well, we know in our elementary schools, kids are having oral sex in the bathrooms. So I don't think that that was happening in my generation. Maybe, but I don't think so. And I think that, you know, like I said, drug use is considered so okay now, especially medical marijuana. Kids have that all the time. And, you know, the violence, I mean, it used to not be that guns were available like they are. If somebody was going to be in a fight, there might be a knife. But now people are actually getting into gunfights, and that's happening in gang communities all night long.
So tell me about the education that goes on in neighborhoods like where the Witch's Hat is. What can the education system do to improve communities like this so it can prevent, to some degree, what at-risk teens participate in?
That is such a hard question because I think in many ways our teachers are doing as much as they can. We have, especially in communities where there are newer immigrants who maybe don't speak English, and especially if they come from poor areas where maybe the school system is different, or maybe the parents have never even gone to school or just gone to first or second grade, their young people, their children are coming to school prepared very differently than someone who comes from a more middle class community and understands the educational system here. So a lot of young people are coming, a lot of 5-year-olds are coming to school not ready, not knowing things that teachers assume that they know. And so the teachers, although they're very caring, are not maybe cluing in to what the starting point is. So I think as the student goes forward into the school system, there becomes a bigger and bigger gap of what they know and what the teacher thinks that they should know. And so we're just leaving kids behind.
Okay. And do you have anything to say about the school systems and
I guess
law enforcement?
Law enforcement, no. Schools, right? I think it was pretty easy because there's so many students just for one teacher, so it was pretty easy to just leave. And like my school, Allahyar, you have like one teacher, like very dependent on each student, so it's very different when teachers care about you too, because it makes you feel like, you know, they care, you know, and you don't have that empty feeling.
And if you were to encounter a teen who is in the deep end and is participating in at-risk behavior, what would you say to that person?
Well, people, when I was in it, people would try to tell me, oh, you shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that, and I really wouldn't listen. If I confront somebody like that, I really wouldn't know what to tell them. They'll probably think I'm crazy, or, you know, I try to explain about my situation to them as best as I could. Hopefully that'll work, but
You know, he has a good story as far as where he's at now and the things that he gets to do, finishing his education. He's gotten to travel through Cloud and Fire and has gotten exposure to a lot of great things, and maybe that's the best that he can do at this time, is just to share what is out there, what is possible.
And from going through the program, where do some kids end up after? Like, where do you picture yourself in 5 years?
Yeah, where do you?
right now, I don't know, college, maybe. Air Force, I still haven't decided, but I can assure you it's a better path than I would have had if I wouldn't have changed or, you know, not seen the light.
They don't all end up in college, but at least they're getting away from the behavior that's really dangerous, and so they may end up getting a job, they have training, they make better friends, family. You know, it's just a different path. But.
So tell me about the worst case scenario. What is the craziest incident that has happened, or the craziest individual that you guys have encountered where it actually made you tug of war with them?
I don't know so much that we tug a war with them. A lot of times we tug a war with their circumstances. So I think one of the most heartbreaking things I encountered was a young person who sat in my office with tears streaming down his face, a great big tough guy, but his family wanted him to quit school so that he could sell drugs. And they needed income and they were depending on him, and so there was pressure. So that was just a really heartbreaking circumstance, because how do we offer a different option that's a reality for him when everyone in his life is pushing him down to a different place and the value is so different? I think also some of the really hard circumstances that we encounter at Cloud and Fire are when we hear stories about really early childhood traumas, where young people have seen their parents murdered by the other parent, or we've encountered people who have had their siblings murdered by a parent. Those kinds of things are just so heartbreaking, and so they come into patterns of self-sabotage and repeat failure over and over. So I think the tug-of-war comes with, how do we bring them out of that devastating background so that they can see hope and see another future that's possible?
Do you think the gang phase will ever fade out, or do you think it's just going to be a ripple effect?
I think that as long as young people feel that there is no economic solution for them outside of the gang, and that there's no support system for them that's stronger than the gang, there will always be gangs. But one of the things we're doing at Cloud and Fire, which even though it's in a very small way, we think it has ripples out into the community, is we try to create a family atmosphere that is stronger than what they can find out in the gangs, and we're trying to make a little dent in it.
Anything to add about that?
Yeah, I agree. It's just a hard situation. There's so many different things going on in the community. There's so many factors, but it comes down to somebody needing to have value and to feel valued and to feel like they're accepted and that there's a safe place for them to go. And so the more places like Cloud and Fire, the more we have a chance of stopping gangs.
Thank you for joining me today. You're watching On Point. I'm Sharonna Allahyar. So, how did you first get introduced into working with at-risk teens?
I was a teacher in the community, and after a number of years doing that, I just really felt that they needed more than what I could give them in the classroom. So I started an after-school club, and one thing led to another, and that was 12 years ago.